Imagine you're a passenger, thousands of feet in the air, and suddenly, something goes horribly wrong. In this countdown, we'll explore 10 real flights that turned into absolute nightmares. We'll start with a case that's uncomfortable but bearable, and descend, level by level, into true airborne terror. By the time we reach number 1, you'll know what it feels like to face panic at 31,000 feet. Buckle up. Number 10. On a long international flight, a baby began to cry before takeoff and didn't stop for 10 hours. Passengers endured a high-pitched, uninterrupted scream that pierced through headphones, earplugs, and sanity itself. The cabin crew couldn't intervene, and the parents, already overwhelmed, could only offer apologies as the child's cries echoed through the night sky. Passengers took turns pacing the aisles, plugging their ears, or simply closing their eyes in frustration. Some travelers reported having migraines. Others sat in silent disbelief as the hours dragged on. One person described it as mental torture with no escape. There was no turbulence, no technical failure, no hijacking. Just the raw psychological strain of being trapped in a metal tube with a sound you can't turn off. It earns this spot because, while it wasn't life-threatening, it pushed passengers to their psychological limits. Number 9. A sports team boarded what was supposed to be a routine flight. But shortly after takeoff, the first signs of disaster appeared. Someone vomited in the aisle, then another, and another. Within an hour, most of the team was violently ill. The cause? A mass case of food poisoning, likely from a pre-flight meal. The cabin filled with the stench of vomit, panic, and desperation. Flight attendants ran out of sick bags. Some passengers used clothing, seat pockets, or even the floor. The lavatories were overwhelmed. People collapsed in the aisles, retching uncontrollably. A few were so dehydrated by landing that they needed immediate medical attention. This wasn't just uncomfortable. It was chaotic, humiliating, and biohazard level disgusting. It ranks here because, while not deadly, it turned the entire plane into a flying disaster zone. Number 8. At first, it seemed like any other long-haul flight. The cabin lights were dimmed. Most passengers had settled in. Some were sleeping, others quietly reading. Then, a commotion in the aisle. A voice shouted for help. People turned their heads. A woman had collapsed and wasn't responding. Flight attendants rushed in and began CPR. Passengers nearby were asked to move, but within minutes, it was clear. She was gone. With no available seats and nowhere else to place her, the elderly passenger's body remained in the aisle for hours, partially covered by a blanket. Crew and passengers had to step over her. The air turned heavy with unease, and many wept quietly. Some described the experience as surreal. Others said it was the longest, most disturbing flight of their lives. It takes this spot because it forced an entire cabin to share space with death, in silence, at 35,000 feet. Number 7. Somewhere between Seattle and Tokyo, a man sat clutching his stomach. The pain had started hours earlier, but now it was unbearable. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He was suffering a kidney stone attack mid-flight with no access to proper medical care. He curled into the fetal position in the aisle, moaning in agony. Fellow passengers and crew tried to comfort him, but there was nothing anyone could do. Every minute felt like an eternity. The turbulence only made things worse. The man later said he felt like his body was being ripped apart from the inside. There were no painkillers strong enough on board, just the long, slow burn of pain, and the knowledge that landing was still hours away. By the time the plane touched down, he was nearly unconscious and had to be rushed to the hospital. It ranks here because it's not just frightening, it's helplessness made physical. You're trapped in the sky, with a body screaming for relief. Before we continue, up to now, these flights were disturbing, but survivable. From this point on, the fear becomes physical. The situations turn darker and far more dangerous. Number 6. It was supposed to be a normal flight, but just after takeoff, something changed. A A woman began acting strangely, talking to herself, growling, and pacing the aisle. Then, without warning, she snapped. She screamed that something evil was aboard, claimed she was being chased. Her eyes were wild. She lunged at flight attendants, throwing punches and kicking while shouting phrases that made passengers believe she was possessed. The cabin turned to chaos. Some passengers ducked in fear, others froze. The woman had to be forcibly restrained by the crew, but she kept fighting, snarling and trying to bite. The pilot declared an emergency. The plane made an unscheduled landing where she was taken away by authorities. The video went viral, but for those on board, it was no joke. It was panic made real, just feet away. It earns this spot because it wasn't just unpredictable. It felt like a horror movie breaking into real life. Number 5. Everything seemed routine until the pilot began shouting about God, terrorism, and the end of the world. It wasn't a passenger, it was the man flying the plane. On JetBlue Flight 191, Captain Clayton Osborne suffered a sudden psychotic breakdown at 35,000 feet. He tried to storm out of the cockpit, forcing the first officer to lock him out and call for help. Osborne ran through the cabin, yelling apocalyptic warnings. Passengers pinned him down, while others cried, panicked, or braced for the worst. They had no idea what was happening, just that the man who should be landing the plane was now screaming about Armageddon. The aircraft made an emergency landing in Amarillo, Texas. Osborne was taken into custody and later found legally insane. It takes this place because the person meant to protect everyone had become the threat, and no one knew how far it would go. Number 4. It started with the smell of smoke, faint but unmistakable. Then the lights flickered. Moments later, the lavatory door burst open, and black smoke began pouring into the cabin. This was Air Canada Flight 797. An electrical fire had started in the rear lavatory at cruising altitude. The cabin filled with toxic smoke. Passengers struggled to breathe. The crew tried to contain the flames, but the fire was spreading fast. The pilots declared an emergency and began descending rapidly towards Cincinnati. Inside the cabin, people screamed, some collapsing to the floor to avoid the smoke. There was no escape. The plane landed and the doors opened, but when fresh oxygen rushed in, the fire erupted violently, killing 23 people in seconds. Only 18 survived. It's here on the list because few things are more terrifying than watching smoke fill the plane you're trapped in, and knowing the fire is getting closer. Number 3. In 1977, Lufthansa Flight 181 was hijacked shortly after takeoff. 4 armed terrorists stormed the cockpit and cabin, shouting in Arabic and German, waving grenades and pistols, and taking full control of the aircraft. For the next 5 days, the plane became a flying prison. It was diverted across 6 countries, denied landing rights, running low on fuel, food, and water. The temperature inside reached unbearable levels. Passengers were dehydrated, terrified, and constantly threatened with death. The hijackers executed the captain on the tarmac in Yemen. His body lay just outside the cockpit door. Eventually, the plane landed in Somalia, where an elite German commando team stormed it in a daring rescue operation. All terrorists were neutralized, the hostages survived, but the trauma remained. It lands this high because for 5 days, passengers were trapped inside a hijacked plane, held at gunpoint, flown across hostile countries, and never knowing if they'd live through the next hour. We've seen hijackings, fires, and complete breakdowns. But now we enter the top 2, where the fear isn't just real, it's moments away from disaster. Number 2. In 1988, TACA Flight 110 took off from Belize en route to New Orleans. Everything was normal until the aircraft flew into a violent thunderstorm. Suddenly, both engines failed. The plane was flying without power, gliding silently above the swamps of Louisiana. Inside the cabin, there was no sound, only the rush of wind and the pounding of hearts. The pilots scanned desperately for a place to land. They spotted a narrow levee near a drainage canal. With no thrust, no second chances, they descended. Passengers braced for impact. Miraculously, the pilots landed the plane safely. Not a single person died. But those on board knew how close they came to death. A few hundred feet lower, and it would have been a mass casualty event. It ranks here because when a plane turns into a glider in a storm, with no engines and nowhere to land, you start praying. Number 1. It happened in 2023, aboard Alaska Airlines Flight 2059. The flight was cruising at 31,000 feet when an off-duty pilot, riding in the cockpit jump seat, suddenly lunged for the controls. Without warning, he tried to shut down both engines mid-flight. "I'm not okay," he reportedly said as he reached for the emergency fuel shutoff. The cockpit crew wrestled him back and quickly removed him from the flight deck. Cabin crew and passengers had no idea what was happening. Just moments earlier, everything was calm. Now, the plane had declared a code red emergency and diverted to Portland for an immediate landing. The man later admitted he was in a mental health crisis and believed he was dreaming. Authorities charged him with 83 counts of attempted murder. It ranks number 1 because it wasn't a failure of the aircraft or a hijacker from the outside. It was someone trusted, sitting quietly in the cockpit, who almost killed everyone.